And so the Chief of Staff of the Army a couple months ago tasked us with coming up with an Army operating concept, which is how we design the future of the Army. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so you see that middle one there, Army operating concept. That's like the vision of where the Army's going. We're saying 2025 and beyond. So we're talking 20 years and beyond from now. So we're working on designing the Army decades, that's going to survive decades. So I start trying to go back in my memory brain, hey, what's the last concept that I really remember the Army had? And then I went out and talked to former predecessors, former TRADOC commanders, former Chief of Staff of the Army, former Chief of Staff of the Armies who were TRADOC commanders and various things. Talked to captains of the Captain's Career Course, talked to folks. And in university, when they came back, I said, hey, when's the last time the Army had an operating concept that you remember, that drove change, that gave a vision that everyone could buy into, that made everyone understand what they are for, and then drove all the .mil PF solutions to it? When's the last time we really had a great unifying concept like that? And universally, the reply I would get is, what? Air-land battle. Yeah, everyone, air-land battle. Dave, if the one you write, you being TRADOC, the collective you, is half as good as air-land battle, man, that'll be great. So I started reading through it, and a couple of things popped out at me. I'm sure I read this one probably in '86, probably when I was a student. I was still a young captain back then. And a couple of things jumped out at me. The first one, you'll see where I highlighted it there. You'll notice it says the air-land battle, this version that is now the gold standard, and they told me to base it off of, is describing how the Army operates and applies combat power at the tactical and operational level of war. Well, any great students of war out there know this. Actually, there's 3 levels of war: tactical, operational, and strategic. So when they wrote this one, they consciously did not discuss the strategic level of war. They purposely only focused on the tactical and operational level. And the reason was, as I talked to folks, they said, you know what, they started writing this in 1974, right after Depew stood up TRADOC after Vietnam. They went over to Israel, got insights from the Israelis, from the Arab-Israeli War, 73, et cetera, like that. And they said, you know, we're coming out of Vietnam, we have a lot of challenges, we consumed the NCO Corps in Vietnam, we didn't have a culture of training, we had race problems, we had drug problems. The Army was sort of besieged by problems when they started writing this, and they said, so we've got to eat this elephant a chunk at a time. So they said, we're just going to focus on the tactical and operational level of war. But actually, very thoughtful, because what it does is it scopes the problem. And the usefulness of this document, 100-5, was that it asked some very intellectually challenging questions, and it answered them in a logical manner. So when you got a solution, you could align the solution to a problem that you had purposely decided that you were going to solve, versus just a random chase a shiny object of the day, which every now and then the Army has been known to do that. None of you, I am sure. But every now and then we can get preoccupied with the shiny object of the day and not be able to link it back to a larger context of what we're trying to do. And usually you do that when you haven't figured out what you're for and you're just trying to accomplish what you think you're supposed to do. So the first question a concept has to discuss is, what level of war are you going to design an Army to operate? I would say that's a pretty big question, okay? What level of war are you going to design an Army to operate at? Because once you ask that question, then you have to say, well, I need to assess people like this. I need to build an Army like this. I need organizations like this. I need to run Command General Staff College like this. I need to organize TRADOC. I need to organize FORCECOM. So that's the first big question. So I would say this first one, what level of war do you want to design the United States Army? That is a big question, okay? So in this one, they said the tactical and operational level. And you'll see actually how that drove the Army, but very useful. The other thing you'll notice, the other thing that a concept has to deal with is describe the environment you want the Army to operate in. Describe the environment you want the Army to operate in. In other words, describe the future. And this is going to get, when I wrap this up, what it means to you individually, the future and what your role in is. And what I tell folks is our job is to describe the future, not predict the future. Two different things. People always want me to predict the future with a level of accuracy that is impossible, okay? In other words, where is the next war going to be? Who's it going to be with? How big is it going to be, etc. like that. And if you can't answer all these questions, I'm not going to buy an army. I said, well, that's not my role. It's not to predict because we can't. But what I can do is describe to you. I can describe to you the environment that our soldiers are going to be in. I can describe to you the kinds of enemies they'll have to fight. So therefore, you can understand the macro level capabilities we want to have. So if you take a look at this, air-land battle actually was built to deal with what? The Soviet Union, a exquisitely well-known enemy. We knew a lot about the Soviet Union. We probably all did. Any of you that were in the Army, either as a DA civilian or military person, we spent all kinds of time studying the Soviets with their little flash deck cards, enemy vehicles, you know, the aircraft, the ground vehicles. We would memorize the echelonment of their forces, what's the distance between the CRP and the main body, and on and on and on. So it was a well-known enemy, okay? And take a look, that's a picture right out of the manual. What does that picture look like? Looks similar to the Central Plains of Europe, okay? In fact, if you were standing in the Fulda Gap and looking east, it would probably look eerily similar to that. Okay, so air-land battle was built to deal with the Soviet Union, where? The jungles of Panama? No, the Central Plains of Europe. So this doctrine was written for a well-known enemy in a well-known location. And who were we going to fight the Soviet Union with? What coalition? NATO. A very well, either you were in NATO or you weren't. It was like, well, I'll join on Monday. In other words, it was very difficult to get in and very difficult to get out. It was kind of a very small club there. And so it was a well-known coalition that had very well-established tactics, techniques, and procedures. You had STANAGs. You had the NATO handbook. I still have mine, the big blue one. You know, we had the same gun tube as the German army, so we had commonality of munitions and things like that. So you had, as you wrote this document, you had a well-known enemy. You're going to fight them in a well-known place with a well-known coalition that had well-known operating procedures. So when I asked folks, I said, so this is describing what kind of environment? Well, it's a Central Europe, Warsaw Pact. No, I said, back up even further. This is most clearly described as air-land battle was written to deal with the known. It was written to deal with the known. But that's very important, because you build one kind of army to deal with the known, you build a different kind of army to deal with something different that I'll get into. So we've asked two big questions already, because remember, operating concepts are about big questions, not small answers. The first big question is, what level of war are you going to build your army to operate at? What level of war? First question. Second question is, describe the environment. This environment I categorize as known, to deal with a known environment. And then the third thing an operating concept does is, if you know the level of war and you know the environment, what problem are you trying to solve? What is your problem? Okay? First, let's come to an understanding of the problem. Then once we say that's the problem, then we'll start crafting answers that then we can grade the answers onto how well it solves the problem. Otherwise, you grade the answers based on random emotional events. Well, I like that one. I like that answer. It's shiny. It matches my other one. It's good, etc. It's cheap. Those are not the right criteria to grade answers. They really need to be graded against a well-defined problem. So, and that is the beauty, actually, of a concept. And particularly, that's why air-land battle was so powerful, because it went through this logical step that I'm laying out. There's no ambiguity there. They said, look, we will tell you right now in black and white, this is for the operational and tactical level of war. That was a conscious decision, so let's get on with the operational and tactical level of war. So I want operational and tactical questions and operational and tactical answers. Okay, you can agree or disagree with that, but that's very empowering, because now everyone's like, I got it. So you know kind of what's in the box and what's out of the box. And then they said, and oh, by the way, here is the environment I want the United States Army to be optimized to operate in. I want them to be able to fight the Soviet Union in the Central Plains of Europe with NATO at the tactical and operational level. That's actually very good guidance. And you could really build an army suited to do that, which is why it is the gold standard, because that's what we did. We built an army for that. So since we knew all that, we could ask the question, and here's the question that's in the manual, next slide, that we have the problem: fight outnumbered and win. That was the problem we had to solve: fight outnumbered and win. Why did we know that was a problem? Because we knew where we were going to fight, and we knew a lot about the Soviet Union. We knew they had a lot of T-55s and T-72s and eventually T-80s. They had a lot of BMPs. They had a lot of aircraft. They had a lot of artillery. They had much more than, we knew they had much more than that we had, because we knew who we was. Okay, it was NATO. So we could count all our tanks. We could count all their tanks. You're like, oh, they have more. Okay, so that's a problem. So that's the problem I have to solve: fight outnumbered and win. Very, very useful, because it was a very well-defined problem that now we can actually start to solve. So we took a look at where we were in the 70s, and we said, okay, we got to fight outnumbered and win in the Central Plains of Europe against the Soviet Union with NATO. So we took a look at what we had there, and we'd take a look at Lieutenant Perkins, as I was here with all 5 of my tanks to date myself, 5 of my M60s. And we start looking at this, say, well, fight outnumbered and win. Perkins, you're supposed to be on the general defense plan here, and I would go up and tank 1, tank 2, tank 3. And we start taking a look at it, and we say, we know how much of the Soviet Union is going to come at Lieutenant Perkins, and we can start doing the math. In fact, we would use mathematical terms, because we've defined the problem as fight outnumbered and win. So we said the problem involves numbers. Therefore, this is a math problem. And so now we have to solve a math problem. So we would use mathematical terms that you probably heard often back then: battlefield geometry, battlefield calculus, right? Those are mathematical references. Don't be surprised that we use those terms, because how did we define the problem? It's a number problem. And how do you deal with number problems? With geometry and calculus and arithmetic and things like that. So we said, we take a look at Perkins there, and we say, okay, he's got 5 M60 tanks. They're sort of dug in, and Echelon 1 comes at him, Echelon 2, and eventually it's just a matter of math till he is overcome by the enemy. And so that's a problem, because his battlefield geometry is this engagement area right here. And he can only fire so many rounds a minute, and they can just, overcome him by echelon after echelon, which was the Soviet doctrine. Just keep wave after wave, and eventually we will overwhelm a smaller numbered force. So then we said, yeah, but we already know where we're going to fight, because we have a great concept. It's called air-land battle. We know where we're going to fight. We know who we're going to fight. We know who we're going to fight it with. We know we're going to fight it right here where Lieutenant Perkins is. So guess what? So the calculus is coming out poorly for me right now. When I put in all the variables and crank out the answer, okay, and use my Hewlett-Packard reverse Polish notation calculator, or probably slide rule initially, it's not coming out well. They said, okay, what can we do to change it? Well, what if instead of having a tank that could only fire when it's stationary, what if we had a tank that could move and shoot at the same time? Because if the tank could move and shoot at the same time, we could maneuver on the enemy. And what do we do, that battlefield geometry? We start changing it, okay? Because before, the geometry was, I don't know, some kind of rhombus or something like this, just right here. Now, if I can maneuver on the enemy, I take my engagement area and I can move it. I can come at a flank, and now my battlefield geometry is changing. So maybe the answer to the calculus problem is different. So what I might want to have is a tank that is very fast and can shoot on the move. And since I know I'm fighting outnumbered and win, I probably have to have a tank that can suck down a bunch of enemy bullets and still survive. So I probably need a very heavily armored tank. And since I'm going to shoot less bullets at the enemy than they're going to shoot at me, each one of my bullets has to be very accurate. So I might need a tank that has a ballistic computer slave to a laser rangefinder. So what I might need is a tank that is very fast, that shoots on the move, that is heavily armored, and is very accurate. Does that sound familiar? It was not an accident that we have the M1 tank designed to do exactly that. The reason the M1 tank is designed as it is, because the M1 tank is designed to solve this problem: fight outnumbered and win. It was explicitly designed to fight that way. The M1 Maybe if I could engage uncommitted echelons. So I know the Soviets are coming in echelon to echelon. If I could engage the deep echelons before they're committed, before they get into my geometric space, then I'll even have an advantage there. So maybe I'll build a helicopter that can fly deep and acquire and engage multiple targets, like 16 at once. So maybe I'll buy a helicopter that can fly deep and has a very accurate anti-tank missiles on it, maybe like 16 of them, and it can engage them all simultaneously. And then I have to have an infantry fighting vehicle that can keep up with my very fast, heavily armored, accurate tank. In fact, I can think about 5 big things you might need. So hence the big 5 that we all grew up with. They were all designed to solve a very specific problem. So that's the power of operating concepts, is that's why blueprints are so powerful. Because once you have a blueprint like this, you've kind of decided what the house is going to look like. It's going to look like M1 tanks and Apaches and MLRS and Bradleys and Blackhawks, because it's all about fighting outnumbered wind in the central plains of Europe against the Soviet Union. And we will have M1 tank and Apaches in our formation for probably another 30 years. Okay, so what TRADOC did with Air Land Battle drove the Army probably for 70 years. Therefore, we've got to have an operating concept that's going to ask big questions. Okay, it's got to ask big questions. And so I think it has adequately done that, and I'll kind of run you through that. So next build here. So our operating concept is unified land operations. Unified land operations. And so unified land operations is our operating concept title. The problem we're solving is how to win in a complex world. The other one was fight outnumbered and win. We call this one win in a complex world. What does that mean, and how is that going to drive anything? Well, let me walk you through it. Word complex. Complex is defined as unknown, unknowable, and constantly changing. Unknown, unknowable, and constantly changing. And then the other word with regards to complex, and this gets back to the sort of pictorial aspect of it, the world on the left is complicated. The world on the right is complex. Okay, the world on the left is black and white, complicated. The world on the left is technicolor, complex. And the Army built on the left is to deal with the known, and it is to standardize inputs, therefore getting predictable outputs. If you're going to build an Army to deal with a complex world, you are dealing with, by definition, a world that is unknown, unknowable, and you can never predict nor replicate the output. Every single time it's different. So that, again, is a very different kind of Army to build, a very different kind of Army to deal with. Now, let's go back to the first word, win. So I put that in there. I get a lot of feedback from folks, and I get probably more pushback on that word than anything else. And like, hey, Dave, I mean, win, define win. Who defines win? The Army doesn't define win. Definitely the TRADOC commander. That's well above your pay grade. You don't define win. I said, oh, really? No, I thought TRADOC was allowed to do that. No, you guys can't. I said, well, who does? They said, well, that's like the National Command Authority, State Department, coalition partners, the whole of government, et cetera, like that. Those are policy issues. I said, so you're telling me that's like a strategic thing? Exactly. Win is a strategic construct. Oh. Okay, well, I guess that's one of the decisions we made here then. If we're going to build an Army to focus at winning, then that means you're going to have an Army that operates at the strategic level. So we've asked the 3 big questions. First one is, what level of war are we going to build an Army for? First time in the history of our Army, we have written an Army operating concept and building an Army to deal with the tactical, operational, and strategic level of war. We've always optimized our Army to operate the tactical operational level. It's the first time we've gone to the strategic level. Describe the environment. We have always written doctrine to deal with the known. Our first field manual came out in 1904. From then on, our doctrine has been dealt to deal with the known. This is the first time we've said our doctrine now is exquisitely designed to deal with the unknown. And then, so those first 2 questions, and then the third question is, what problem are you trying to solve? What I'm saying is, we, the Army, have to figure out how do we win at the strategic level in an unknown, unknowable, and constantly changing world that is not predictable nor replicable. That's our problem. Okay, so win in a complex world answered all 3 of those questions right there. Now, the other organization who do 10,000 things, you cannot run around all day, whack-a-mole, 10,000 things. You've got to have one or two things that drive change throughout the whole organization. So I'm like, hey, Perkins, time for a forcing function. I said, okay, give me 100-5 again, read it. I said, fight, outnumbered, and win. Fight, outnumbered, and win. 6 syllables. You have 6 syllables to define the problem for the United States Army in the next 50 years. You know, I'm sure they look at me, they go like, hey, you're a 4-star general, and the only guidance you can give us is 6 syllables? I said, it's a forcing function. So how about 7? No, 6. 5 is better, okay? So they went around, win in a complex world, 6 syllables. That's really how that was the forcing function, 6 syllables. Like I said, that will provide clarity, win in a complex world. But if you only have 6 syllables to describe the problem for the dominant land force, the United States Army, for the next 40 years, you better use every one of those syllables very sparingly. And you better get a lot of rock out of a lot of blood out of each one of those rocks. So I've already told you what the word complex is. It's a pretty complex meaning in there. Told you what win. Win does what? It denotes the level of war you're talking about. It denotes the process you have to go through, but also the order is important. Because again, I've got to use those 6 syllables, not only the content of them, but the order of them. So on the left, fight, outnumbered, and win, what was the default task there? To win, you had to fight. And so we focused on building an army to fight, because that's what you do at the tactical and operational level. So that it goes back to the first big question. What kind of army are you going to build to operate at what level? If you say tactical operational, what do you do at the tactical operational level? You shoot things. That's what you do. So you are always focused on fighting. And so on airland battle, we said in order to win, you must fight. What does the right one say? I say focus on winning. Focus on winning. As a matter of fact, if you do it right, you might not have to fight to win. You might be able to win without fighting. You might be able to win without fighting. But, I always have to stamp my feet like I was back in the Armor Basic course, falling asleep after lunch. I have to be very careful with this when I talk to my friends on Capitol Hill and OSD and everything like that. If you even want a possibility to win without fighting, you absolutely, positively, in everybody's mind, must be able to win if you do fight. See, the problem is a lot of people may say, yeah, that sounds great. Sign me up for that. The winning without fighting, sign me up for that. I'll buy that army. That must be a cheaper army to buy because you're not going to have to fight. You're just going to win. I go, well, no, you don't understand how this whole thing works. If you even want to have a chance to win without fighting, you must have such overwhelming capability that it is absolutely clear in everybody's eyes, if it comes to a fight, you're going to win. And then once everyone understands, whoa, I'm not messing with them. In other words, the sheer mention of your name has them cowering their boots and they say, I'm not going to pick a fight with that person. Now you may have a possibility with winning without fighting. So the misperception is people say, I want to buy the winning without fighting army. That could be a very expensive army. That could be a very expensive army. Because if all of a sudden somebody picks a fight with you, why do they pick a fight with you? Because they think they might win, okay?